Welcome to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting live on March 11th from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. In the second half of the show, we're going to hear a Florida Senate committee that voted to add hurdles to the petition gathering process for giving constitutional amendments on the Florida ballot. But first, we're going to talk about the Gulf of Mexico, or as it's being called in some federal and Florida government offices, the Gulf of America. And our guest is Jack E. Davis, a Pulitzer Prize winner and the author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. He will be the keynote speaker at the Florida Humanities Festival in Sarasota on March 22nd, where he'll talk about the history and the culture of the Florida Suncoast. So I want to welcome you to WMNF's Tuesday Cafe, Jack.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad you could come on today. So, well, let's get this question out of the way. Is it the Gulf of America or the Gulf of Mexico? What have you thought about that recent controversy there?
Well, I've thought a lot about it, and it's both. It depends on one's opinion. There are a lot of people that are real happy with the name change. And there are those who are not so happy. I think I fall into the second camp. I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico. I have this lifelong, in the Tampa Bay area, and I have a lifelong intimate relationship with it. And there's just something special about, writing the book was a labor of love. And it's just, to me, there's something special about that name. And I love the X in the middle of Mexico, and it cast my mind back to my childhood when I, thought about pirates and buried treasure, and X marks the spot, and that X marks the spot that I truly love.
So how did the Gulf of Mexico get its name, and when did that name first appear on maps?
Well, it first appeared on maps sometime, the best of our knowledge, sometime in the 16th century or the 1500s, and it's uncertain whether it came from some Spanish official or explorer / conquistador, or from a cartographer. It was, maps were changing a lot, particularly in those days, particularly of the New World, as more new land was being discovered by Europeans. Of course, well known to indigenous people, had lived on those lands for tens of thousands of years, or anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12,000 years. And so we don't know exactly who came up with that name. At one point, the Gulf of Mexico was called the Gulf of New Spain, and Mexico was referred to by the Spanish as New Spain for quite a while.
So you mentioned the indigenous people that lived along the Gulf. What can you tell us, especially about the indigenous people and tribes of Florida that were there before Europeans arrived?
Well, the best that archaeologists and anthropologists can determine is that people have been living on Florida's Gulf Coast perhaps as long as 10,000 years. And 10,000 years ago, the Gulf of Mexico coastline, Florida coastline, reached anywhere from 70 to 90 miles out into the present-day Gulf of Mexico, and people lived out there. And along with megafauna, giant sloths, wildcats, and mammoths, and they lived off the land, but also the estuaries, the Calusa, who lived down in Southwest Florida, perhaps as far north as Sarasota, depended almost exclusively on the estuarine environment for their protein. They were sedentary people, but they were not agrarian because their food came to them by way of the Gulf of Mexico.
And what about the Tocobaga tribes? They lived along the Gulf as well?
Yes, they lived in the Tampa Bay area, and they tended to be seasonal residents. Some of them would stay on the Gulf year-round. Others would migrate inland during part of the year to hunt and to gather fruits and other edible plants. and then north of the Tocobaga were the Timucua, who were the same, who would spend seasons on the Gulf of Mexico. The Clusa, as far as we know, are the only ones who routinely spent their entire time on the Gulf of Mexico without leaving during certain seasons.
You already talked about how the Gulf of Mexico used to be, how the Florida Peninsula used to be a lot wider, and so the Gulf of Mexico may be smaller in that sense. What else can you say about changes that have happened to the Gulf over the eons?
Well, one major change that we in Florida have benefited economically from is the creation of the beach. Our white quartz beaches are a true gift of our tourist industry, is a true gift of nature. That quartz sand is actually sediment that over the eons migrated by way of erosion down to the Gulf of Mexico. Streams, on rivers, entering the Gulf of Mexico, being caught up in the nearshore currents, and building the beaches and barrier islands, by the way, that we love so much today. And as I say in the book, when you walk on a beach in Florida, you walk on a mountain.
On a mountain, did you say?
Yeah, because the white quartz is from the Appalachian Mountains. Over the years ago, the Appalachian Mountains were taller than the Himalayan, but through erosion, that white quartz, rain, wind, ice, much of that white quartz made its way down to the Gulf of Mexico to build our beaches and barrier islands.
So let's talk about the European explorers that came. What do we know about their interaction with the Gulf of Mexico?
Their interaction was mostly about trying to find something that would make them rich, gold or silver. As Cortez had succeeded in becoming quite wealthy in discovering gold and silver in Mexico, others who came to the Gulf of Mexico had hoped to do the same, to duplicate what he had accomplished in Mexico. They failed. They didn't do well. Many of them perished. A lot of people don't know that Ponce de Leon, who did not come to Florida looking for the Fountain of Youth, by the way. He came looking for, his charter with the king was to seek gold, silver, and slaves, meaning native peoples he could enslave and take back to Puerto Rico. He ended up on the Gulf Coast twice in 1513 and 1521, and engaged in skirmishes with the Clusa both times. The second time he was hit in the thigh with a poisoned dart, which ultimately took his life, which is something we don't learn about in the textbook, and many other conquistadors who followed. Panfilo de Narvaez, who spent time in the Tampa Bay area, Hernando de Soto, they died during their explorations. They weren't not very successful. They often starved. Some were reduced to eating their horses. Some were reduced to eating each other. Yet they have among the richest estuaries in the world right before them. They just didn't know how to harvest the food from the estuaries.
I want to remind people that our guest is Jack E. Davis, a Pulitzer Prize winner and the author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Kinane, and we are broadcasting live on March 11th from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. So the history of the United States is really tied in with the history of the Gulf of Mexico. What are some of the ways that history is tied together?
Yeah, and that's one reason why I wrote the book, because it is very much tied into the history of the United States. And but when you read the history textbooks in high school and college, the Gulf of Mexico is just glossed over, and if even mentioned. Manifest Destiny, for example, most people know about Manifest Destiny, and of course the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. President Jefferson made his deal with Napoleon for the Louisiana Territory, many people believe, because he wanted to double the size of the United States, acquire that territory west of the Mississippi to have an area in which the United States could expand U.S. population. And indeed, he wanted that. But he actually paid double for New Orleans than what he paid for the rest of that territory because he also wanted the port of New Orleans, control of that, and the control of the Mississippi River, because whoever controlled the Mississippi River controlled commerce moving through the heart of North America down to the Gulf of Mexico and onto the Gulf Stream and to markets in Europe. And he also wanted the U.S. to control the Gulf of Mexico. He encouraged President Monroe, who succeeded him two presidencies later, to offer to buy Cuba from the Spanish. Cuba's at the gateway of the Gulf of Mexico, and whoever controlled that gateway controlled who came and went through the Gulf of Mexico. And Monroe made a decent, well, not Monroe, but another president later made a decent offer to the Spanish for Cuba. And the Spanish said they would rather see the island sunk at the bottom of the sea than in the hands of the Americans. And, another history is the development of the commercial seafood trade in America. The Spanish operated on the Gulf for 300 or more years. The British and the French, but none of them developed a commercial seafood trade. But once we acquired Florida, the U.S. acquired Florida officially in 1821, New England fishers began coming down to the Gulf of Mexico. They had fished out their fisheries in the Northeast, and the Gulf of Mexico was ripe for the taking. And it was a very healthy environment. If you went to Pensacola in the 1880s, you would hear New England accents. Because the fish houses were operated by transplanted New Englanders. And so those fishers are really our first, what we call transplants to the Gulf South.
I imagine that histories and records exist from that time about what types of fish and the amounts of fish that people were catching. Can we compare what was happening then in the Gulf of Mexico from a fishery standpoint to now?
We can. Really, commercial fishery in terms of global and nationwide was founded on red snapper, and mainly by fishers out of Pensacola. But many other fish were quite popular. Goliath, grouper, and which was very popular today, became quite popular in the 19th century. Sea turtles, clams and oysters. Oysters are still a principal seafood today, and marketable seafood. And of course, crabs and shrimp, which was a chief marketable seafood in the 19th century and is today as well. The commercial fishery in the Gulf of Mexico will, in certain years, outperform the entire East Coast fishery from Maine down to Florida. It's the most popular saltwater fishing hole in America. And that really begins in the 19th century with tarpon actually in the 1880s, when the first known tarpon was caught with a fish hook, and it set the sport fishing world on fire. And that's really the beginning of our tourist trade, and a coastal tourist trade in Florida is tarpon fishing.
So besides fishing, what other economically important aspects are there of the Gulf of Mexico to the economy of the U.S.?
Well, of course, tourism and oil. We can't, petrochemical industry is vitally important to the U.S. economy, as we know, and we are the largest offshore location for natural gas and oil in the United States, but also the pulp paper industry came to life on the Gulf of Mexico in the 1930s when the bleaching process was perfected. Paper mills grew up all along the coast from Texas to Florida, largely because of the readily accessible pine trees that went into the manufacture of pulp paper.
So I want to fast forward a little bit throughout history to environmental changes, environmental law changes that happened. Was the Gulf of Mexico and its surrounding waters, were they improved by certain environmental laws that came into being? I'm thinking maybe of the Clean Water Act and some of the other laws starting around the late 60s, early 70s. How has the Gulf of Mexico changed because of those laws?
The Clean Water Act of 1972 had a profound impact on Gulf of Mexico waters. Virtually every municipality around the Gulf and many uprivers that sent their raw sewage down those rivers to the Gulf of Mexico were pumping raw sewage into the bays and bayous. I mean, Tampa Bay, when I was a kid growing up on Tampa Bay in the 1970s, the seagrass bed, we had lost by then 60-70% of the seagrass beds in Tampa Bay because of industrial, but also wastewater pollution. And I was lucky to be able to catch anything other than anything other than a croaker. And if I got really lucky, I could catch a speckled trout. And the only bird life I saw were gulls and brown pelicans. I didn't see the stick-legged wading birds that we see today in Tampa Bay. Didn't see osprey. The first osprey I saw was in the late 1980s, and there was one nesting up near Dunedin. And we climbed into our cars and drove up there to see this wild bird we'd only heard about but had never seen. Bald eagles, we didn't see bald eagles. And those are all back now. And it's the same way all across the Gulf. We got everybody pitched in: businesses, policymakers, conservationists, volunteers. Pitched in, and we cleaned those bays up and replanted seagrass beds and did a phenomenal job of restoring them. Sadly, we're slipping again in the Tampa Bay area. St. Petersburg is guilty of pumping a lot of raw sewage into the bay. Can't keep up with the growth. And of course, we all know about the phosphate industry and the leaky gypsum stacks. But back in the day, the phosphate industry worked hard to try to clean up its act as well. And as a result of having, the Clean Water Act, this led to the expansion of conservation groups. Virtually every bay and sound and bayou around the Gulf of Mexico has 1, 2, or 3 conservation groups working on its behalf. There are river keepers all around the Gulf of Mexico, yes, when Bob Graham was governor, he instituted the Save Our Coast program, which worked very effectively in helping to clean up those waters and save our rivers. And those rivers, there are some 116 rivers that flow through U.S. states down to the Gulf of Mexico. They bring that sediment I mentioned, but they bring nutrients and they bring fresh water, all of which are vital to the estuarine environment. And cleaning those up has been vitally important as well.
Our guest is Jack E. Davis, a Pulitzer Prize winner and the author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. So all these rivers bringing down fresh water and pollutants from the Mississippi and so on has led to something that comes back every year, it seems, and that's the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. What can you tell us? What is it, first of all, and why do we see it, and what do we know about its size and its seriousness now?
So I think we have to start calling it the Gulf of America dead zone now, and maybe take responsibility that we should have taken years ago in fixing the problem. So the Gulf of Mexico, or the dead zone, which is one of the largest in the world, and can expand to the size of the state of Connecticut and larger, in certain years during the summertime. Depending on the rainfall in the Midwest, and I say depending on the rainfall in the Midwest, that's because what goes down on the ground in the Midwest finds its way through rivers and streams to the Mississippi River and down to the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America. And what is coming down is nitrogen overload, which is creating a literal dead zone, sapping the major area of the Gulf of Mexico of oxygen that is needed to support the marine life. And so either it swims out or it dies when it's caught. So in rainy summer or rainy spring times, that means more runoff down to the Gulf of Mexico. That means a bigger dead zone. In dry spring times, which is bad for farmers, that means a smaller dead zone for the Gulf of Mexico. But we trace the origins. Now, get this. You and I are, I don't know about you, Sean, but I'm a baby boomer. And you can trace the origins of the dead zone to the baby boom, because what's happening in the 1950s and 1960s is the cereal aisle in the grocery stores is expanding leaps and bounds. And where is the grain and the corn grown for that cereal? Up in the in the Mississippi River Basin, where and then of course it's the fast food era comes to life. Where is that? Where's the meat raised up in the Mississippi River Basin? Where are those potatoes for those French fries we love? Grown up there as well, but a high fructose corn syrup, which goes into pre-sweetening cereal, which doesn't happen until after World War II. Before World War II, cereal was considered a health food. All of that comes from the Mississippi River Basin, and so our diet is to a large degree responsible for the dead zone.
The Gulf of Mexico, some people might be surprised to learn, actually has corals growing in them. And I'm specifically talking about the flower banks, which is fairly close to Texas, relatively speaking. What can you tell our audience about the flower banks?
Well, the flower banks are healthy, fortunately, which we can't always say about coral and in other parts of the world, including the Caribbean. The flower banks are healthy. Nobody's quite sure why they exist there, but they have ideal conditions for them to exist there. The flower banks are heavily studied by Texas A&M at Corpus Christi and other scientists. And they're considered a real gem, but they're also a barometer for the health of the Gulf of Mexico. If we start losing that coral, then we know that the Gulf of Mexico is really sick.
So we have a couple of questions. Do you mind answering some questions that people have emailed in? I want to remind people that our guest is Jack Davis, a Pulitzer Prize winner, the author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Kinane. We're broadcasting live on March 11th from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Bubba writes in, he says, naming it the Gulf of America is one of the dumbest things that Trump ever did. Why did Trump chumps, he says, find such crazy things acceptable, and why is Congress so spineless in Trump's shadow? I think that wasn't as much a question for our guest Jack as it was just Bubba trying to make a statement here. Art from Largo is asking about the gold and silver that you mentioned that the Spanish explorers discovered, and he wants to know, did they originally discover them from Earth or from the ornaments worn by indigenous people? Do you know the answer for Art?
Yeah, so only in Mexico could gold and silver found in the ground in mine. But the conquistadors were hoping again to duplicate what Cortez had found in Mexico. They were hoping that Florida would produce that gold and silver, which it didn't. So it was only trinkets and ornaments in which gold and silver existed in Florida belonging to indigenous peoples. And like Panfilo de Narvaez and Soto, saw such trinkets and assumed that there might be deposits of precious metals in the area. And the clever Tocobaga told Panfilo de Narvaez to get him out of Tampa Bay, to get him away, because he brought with him, war dogs and just ruthless ways. They pointed north and said, "Go up to Appalachia. They've got gold up there," which is essentially saying, "Go up to FSU," but up to the Tallahassee area, the Big Bend area. And that's what Narvaez did, but ended up starving, and the conquistadors ended up eating all of their horses to feed themselves, despite the fact it's mullet are running. They're on the shoreline. Mullet are running into the rivers, and oysters are everywhere about, and they're starving and eating their horses. Well, but no gold.
Not in
no
Florida.
Gold or silver. Yeah.
Well, David writes in and he asks whether that the current drill baby drill mantra might affect Florida's coast, and whether we might expect near offshore oil derricks coming soon. David concludes by saying, "I think that having nasty tar balls and oil spills washing up on our beaches would ruin our tourist trade," but he thinks that President Trump doesn't care about that. So do you have any thoughts about whether there's been a change in politics about accepting oil drilling near Florida's coasts?
If we go back through history, Florida has always kept oil out. And that's been by the choice of Floridians in its leaders. And we have succeeded time and time again. It seems like a movement comes along every 10 years or so. This seems cyclical, that let's go ahead and drill in Florida waters. But the state has prohibited it. And has succeeded. And let me point out, it's not just the oil derricks. What would really destroy the tourist industry is the onshore infrastructure that's required to support those oil derricks. That's where the greatest pollution comes from. That's where the greatest foulness comes from, around the Gulf of Mexico, in Louisiana, and Texas in particular. And that's what we really need to worry about. It fouls up the shoreline aesthetically, with the presence of those inshore infrastructures, but also the constant, almost daily spills that come from them.
Well, Jack, those were the questions that I had, but I think if there's anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with about the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, any of that, what would you like to tell them about the Gulf?
Well, I think I've given hundreds of talks over the years about the Gulf of Mexico, all around the country, and what heartens me most of all is how much love there is for that sea, and the folks in the Tampa Bay area do truly love the Gulf of Mexico, and you have to, and whether you call it the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, and you have to appreciate that, and I'm grateful for it, and it moves me to see that, and so keep loving it and keep protecting it. That's the key thing. I don't know what we have to gain from the name change. What the Gulf really needs is wise leadership to lead the Gulf region into and through this climate change century we're in now. We're facing unprecedented challenges on the coast, and that's what needs attention, not a name change, not chest thumping.
And finally, we did just get a text from Gemini, who wants to know if there are any other critters that are special to Florida and the Gulf that you think are underappreciated.
Oh my gosh. Every single one of them. I mean, they all have their place in the ecosystem, in a healthy environment, and that healthy environment factors directly into our quality of life. If it's not healthy, then our quality of life is diminished. So, the one species I like to see go is the construction crane. That's one that we can afford to let to push over the edge to extinction. Let's get rid of the construction crane. It doesn't belong on the coast.
Well, Hurricane Milton tried to do just that, it seems like. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us on WMNF's Tuesday Cafe today, Jack.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Jack E. Davis is a Pulitzer Prize winner and the author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. He'll be the keynote speaker at the Florida Humanities Festival in Sarasota on March 22nd, where he'll talk about the history and the culture of the Florida Suncoast. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're produced at WMNF Tampa, and we're going to turn now to the Florida legislature and a bill that would put barriers to getting new amendments in the state constitution. You can drop me an email, let me know what you think at dj@wmnf.org. According to the Florida Phoenix, the bill would radically change the process of collecting petitions for citizen-led constitutional amendments. It was approved yesterday on a 6-3 party line vote in the Senate Ethics and Elections Committee, and we're going to hear some of that debate right now. A closely related version passed in the House committee last week. So here's some of that debate from yesterday about the bill and its proposed amendments. One amendment that was approved by that committee yesterday would ban the use of state funds to advocate for or against a ballot measure. Republican Senator Erin Grahl introduces an amendment here about petition circulators, and she gets questions from Democratic Senator Tina Polsky and others.
This amendment requires any signed petition form that is later found to have been submitted by an ineligible or unregistered circulator to be invalidated and not counted toward the number of necessary signatures for placement on the ballot. That's the amendment.
Are there questions on the amendment? Senator Polsky.
Thank you. How are you able to track which petitions have been brought in by a particular petition circulator?
Senator Grahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The petitions have the petition circulator number on them.
Senator Polsky, did that respond to your question?
Yes, I have a follow-up.
Okay, please.
Thank you. If it turns out that a petition circulator was not legally authorized to gather petitions and you signed it thinking it would count, how are you informed that yours is invalidated and you have an opportunity to put a new one in?
Senator Grahl.
The bill does not contemplate a mechanism for that to occur if it was fraudulently obtained.
Senator Polsky.
You aren't concerned that that's disenfranchising voters if they thought how are they supposed to know if someone is a legal petition circulator? They sign something at the supermarket or from a friend or any of the ways that people do it. How are they supposed to know so that they can put a new one in?
Well, I think that
I'm sorry, Senator Grahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the petition sponsors would be incentivized to ensure that they have people that are out there working that qualify and are qualified to be petition circulators. I think that it goes back to the petition sponsor, and ultimately, as an individual, you still have the ability. There's nothing in this legislation that takes the ability of an individual to go get the form and sign it themselves and turn it into the supervisor of elections office. So you are allowing there to be a middleman, and we are saying, and the purpose of this legislation is to ensure that the middleman is doing what they are supposed to do. But a good analogy, and one that was brought up on this issue to me the other day, is if you were a notary and you married someone and you weren't validly a notary, the marriage would not be valid, right? So we're saying that you cannot be ineligible to collect petitions, and we are going to allow those petitions to stand. And so I think that it's more about the incentive to the petition sponsor to get it right before they allow people to circulate on their behalf.
Senator Polsky.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to get into this more when we're in the meat of the bill, because something that really struck me was that a volunteer, someone like me from the last election, would give out plenty of these petitions to people. So this is a huge change in the law that a lot of people won't know about for the next election if this amendment and this bill passes. So there will be a lot of people who don't know that their neighbor can't give them a petition. And so, just putting the onus on the organization that's running that drive to say that they should have good petition circulators doesn't change the fact that there will be a lot of volunteers and people who want to do this who don't know about this massive change in law, because for the whole time that this has been going on, people have done this as a grassroots volunteer kind of situation. So how are we going to ensure that people's petitions are, that they know if they've been invalidated, and moreover, if there's a penalty that's much harsher now for signing something twice by mistake, people are going to be afraid to sign it again because they don't know that theirs has been invalidated unless there's some kind of database that they could look it up like they do vote by mail. So that was a very long question, but I think you got it.
Senator Grahl.
I think I have parts of it. So there is nothing in the bill that prohibits somebody from giving a blank petition to somebody. So they can give a blank petition to somebody. They can't collect it. The individual then has to mail it back on their own. They have to fill it all out on their own. So there's nothing that would prohibit that in the language. Volunteers would be required. If they were volunteers who were going to collect with the purpose of getting them to the supervisor of elections, they're going to go through the same training that the petition circulators do. It's because they are volunteers of the petition sponsor. So the petition sponsor is responsible for making sure that people who are acting on their behalf, whether or not it's a volunteer capacity or paid capacity, are following the law. They would go through the same training. They would have a number. So those volunteers would have a number because they are a petition circulator, paid or not paid. There's nothing in the bill, again, that prohibits you going to your neighbor and saying, here's a blank petition, and they need to mail it in. That part of the bill tracks with our vote by mail. You obviously can't do that with a ballot, but you can return certain individuals' ballots who have filled them out. This bill allows for your own and a family member and 2 others, just like the vote by mail provision.
I'm going to reserve some of these questions for the main bill.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Senator Bernard, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Grahl, in regards to the petitions that are invalidated, are there any avenues for the voters to receive any notice that their petitions were invalidated through this amendment?
Senator Grahl.
There are not.
Is there a way for us to eventually include that so that way they can get notice from the SOE?
Senator Grahl.
I think that we should continue to have the conversation for sure, because I do understand that if you think that it was valid and you think you gave it to somebody who you did not know wasn't a good actor, you think you've signed it. Now, we aren't changing the law is the same around knowingly sign a second petition, so we're not making changes there. I think the challenge is practically how and when that would happen, and knowing that there are some technology changes that need to occur today in order to start notifying voters about the verification in general, that there's just some logistical questions that we may have to tackle in how we get to a proposed solution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bernard. Are there further questions on the amendment? Further questions? Are there appearance cards on this amendment? Any other appearance cards? If not, is there debate on the amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? Senator Polsky.
Thank you. I think it's very clear that there's going to be missing in the bill that people who think they signed a petition and through no fault of their own, that petition is invalidated, that they should be notified. The underlying bill makes a big point of saying that the supervisor of elections has to send letters to everyone whose ballot has been accepted to make sure they really agreed with it, which I have a lot of problems with, but we'll discuss later in the bill. So you want the supervisor of elections to go through this Herculean and costly effort to make sure that people whose signatures have been validated and are accepted are really theirs. Like, are you really sure you meant to vote this way or sign this petition? But on the other hand, for the exact opposite, those people don't get a voice at all. They signed a petition, they thought it was valid for all they know, and suddenly it's gone without any of their knowledge. That can't be right. That is complete disenfranchisement. That is the definition of it. The enormous efforts that are required to get 1 million signatures for each of these, and most of them are done grassroots, many volunteers working really hard, and you're just going to say wiping out all those because this one petition circulator got, a $5 bonus seems completely unfair. This process is designed for citizens to speak up, to try to pass on their own legislation that they believe should be passed, but that this body will not. And we've had some really incredible laws and changes that have been done by this process. And I could see this wiping out tens of thousands of ballots without anybody being any the wiser. And lastly, I would say that there could be bad actors out there who everybody knows, there's going to be a recreational marijuana ballot initiative next year, and they're going to be working really hard to get that done. So people who are opposed to it could stand outside Publix with a board and say, and they can get a copy of the petition and say, please sign this, and people may sign it, and then they think they signed it, so they won't sign a legitimate one, and then that person is not a valid petition person. And so all of those get lost. So it can really be, talk about fraud, that could really be fraudulent. And I think this is a bad, bad idea on top of a bad, bad bill.
Further in debate.
That was Senator
in debate.
Polsky.
Senator Grall, to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just speak specifically to this amendment and to a misstatement that I made earlier. So you can have two petitions, yours and an immediate family member's, not two in addition to it. That's the two, just so that that's clear. But this amendment, in terms of being ineligible or unregistered, it's not about somebody who gets a fine. As you spoke to, Senator Polsky, the ineligible or unregistered, that is somebody who is not permitted to be a petition circulator. So it would be a felon who has not had their rights restored, the rights to vote restored, or a non-citizen. And so this specific provision speaks to that individual alone, not someone who has some other violation. This wouldn't wipe out all of the petitions of somebody who may not follow one component of the law. It's about legitimately not being eligible to be a petition collector under our laws. And at some point, our laws need to matter in the collection of all of these petitions. We're talking about amending the Constitution, and that's what this bill seeks to do, is just in these amendments to make sure that we have integrity in that process. So with that, I'd ask for your support of the amendment.
Yeah, the amendment before you. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Nay. Call the roll.
Senator Avila?
Yes.
Senator Bradley?
Yes.
Senator Collins?
Yes.
Senator Garcia?
Yes.
Senator Grall?
Yes.
Senator Polsky?
No.
Senator Roussan?
No.
Vice Chair Bernard?
No.
Chair Gates?
Yes, and by your vote, the amendment passes. Take up the next amendment. Barcode 658022. Senator Grall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment
Senator
requires the
Aaron Grall
division to
Republican.
develop the training for petition circulators within 30 days of the bill becoming law. That is the amendment.
Other questions? Questions on the amendment? Are there appearance cards on the amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? Saying no debate, Senator waves close. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Show the amendment passing. Take up the next amendment. Barcode 810062. Senator Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment advocates for or against any matter that is the subject of any constitutional amendment, including public service messages that seek to do the same.
Other questions on the
Senator
amendment?
Jennifer Bradley.
Questions on the amendment? Other appearance cards on the amendment? John, I believe your last name is Labriola. I'm sorry if I... From the Christian Family Coalition of Florida. And what's your last name, sir?
It's Labriola.
Labriola.
And thank you, committee. My name is John Labriola with the Christian Family Coalition. Our organization is a statewide organization that advocates for religious liberties, and we were very involved in the campaign last year to defeat Amendment 4. We actually launched a campaign to get individual county commissions to sponsor resolutions opposing the amendment that led to 15 different counties and cities around the state of Florida. Our concern with this amendment, and we'd like some information from the sponsor, is last year, as you know, there was a lawsuit by the ACLU against Governor DeSantis for creating a website that explained the reasons why voters should oppose Amendment 4. And we believe that the governor's involvement in advocating against this amendment was very critical in our success at defeating it. So my question for the sponsor would be, would this amendment get rid of the ability of the governor to advocate against an amendment of this kind? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rich Templin, representing the AFL-CIO.
Mr. Chair, been a very long time since you and I did this.
I know. It's good to see you again.
It's really nice to have you back, sir.
You haven't aged at all.
Oh gosh, that's a lie. I just want to thank Senator Bradley for this amendment. You know, some of the things we saw last year, regardless of the technical details of it, it just didn't have a good look. I was on a phone call talking about some of the developments in the news, and my son overheard the conversation and asked me some questions. And I really was trying to be balanced and fair with him, and he said, well, that's not fair. And so this amendment goes a long way to giving some confidence that processes like this are fair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Templin. Brad Ashwell. Thank you very much. Are there any further appearance cards on this amendment? If not, is there further debate? Senator Gall, would you you're recognized to close?
Republican Senator Aaron Grahl.
It's okay. I will debate them before Senator Bradley closes.
I apologize, Senator Grahl.
Okay. I know.
I had you on the amendment instead of Senator Bradley.
It's okay.
Senator Grahl, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what Senator Bradley is trying to do, and I have some concerns about the breadth of the amendment, but am supportive of continuing to have this conversation about what this would look like. I think that just the language that public funds may not be used to advocate for or against any matter that is the subject of an amendment or revision of the state constitution, I think could be interpreted so broadly that our just say no to drugs campaigns and some different campaigns that we may have that need to be ongoing for a variety of reasons regarding our current laws could be prohibited. And so I think that I appreciate what the intent is, but I would hope that we would be able to really more narrowly refine this revision to the bill as we move forward.
All right. Further in debate. Other members who wish to debate the amendment? If not, Senator Bradley, please close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you, members. This amendment makes sure that taxpayers don't get the bill for political issue campaigns. I'm happy to work with folks going forward. This in no way prohibits public service messaging campaigns from the state. A very important part of state government is messaging and informing. When they cross over into attempting to influence the outcome of a ballot measure, I think we're then treading in territory that makes me very uncomfortable as a conservative who is very concerned about what our role of government is in a democratic society. So I think that let's tighten it up. I think that there is a way to get there, but we do have to be mindful about taxpayer dollars being used for political purposes.
That's Republican Senator.
Senator, having closed on the amendment, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The amendment passes. Thank you, Senator Bradley. You now have the bill is amended before you, and before we take that up, I think there may be some people here who are waiting for Senator Ngoglia's bill. He has notified us that he will TP the bill, so it will not be heard today. The bill will be heard at some point, I'm sure. Two bills, both of his bills will not be heard today. And so now we have the bill as amended before you. Let's take up questions on the bill as amended. Senator Polsky.
Democratic
Thank you,
Senator
Chair. I
Tina
have
Polsky.
quite a few, so maybe after a little while I'll stop and other people can ask, and then maybe I could come back if that's
Well,
possible.
why don't you try a few, and we'll let you take a breath after that.
Thank you so much. General question to start. I noticed, especially towards the end of the bill, that there was the word elector was crossed out in favor of the word voter. Can you explain what that means or what the difference is?
Senator Aaron Grahl, a Republican.
Senator Grahl.
Thank you. I believe that it's just conforming with, as we go through sections of statute that we've made changes to already.
Senator Polsky, you're recognized.
Thank you. Something occurred to me that, sometimes there's a years-long process with these petitions, and someone could sign, and then unfortunately they pass away. What happens in a situation like that if it's already been given to the supervisor and it's been validated and the person is no longer with us?
Senator Grahl.
Yes, it is still valid. It's still a valid petition as long as the individual was alive when it was signed.
Okay.
Further, Senator Polsky.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we talked a little bit earlier in one of the amendments about, I guess, volunteers having petitions in their hand, and this is going to go back and forth. So first of all, like line 390 talks about, 387 has the definition of petition circulator. And so the first thing that struck me was that I know I have carried many of these ballots around and gave them to a lot of people. So for the last go around with amendments, there were folks from the organization that was collecting them that we would get a lot. I'd give it to somebody. They'd drive it to a particular location. Those people would amass them, and then they would bring them to supervisors of elections. So that process is no longer going to be available?
Senator Grahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would not be available unless you have a petition circulator number. So a petition circulator, which, like I said, could be volunteer or paid, would have a specific number that would authorize them to carry more than those two petitions.
Senator Polsky.
Thank you. To be clear about blank forms that people fill out themselves, line 1219 talks about a person who distributes, collects, delivers, or otherwise physically possesses more than 2 signed petition forms. So is what you're saying is that anyone can carry as many blank petition forms as they want and give them out? It's only once they're signed? And if that's the case, can we make this language clearer?
Senator Grahl.
Thank you. So yes, that is correct, that it's when they're blank, but nobody can fill in anything on the petition. So they can't be pre-filled out. So it is once those petition forms are filled out that they cannot be in a non-petition circulator's possession.
Well, that's Republican Senator Aaron Grahl speaking yesterday in a Senate Ethics and Elections Committee, and she was answering questions there from Democratic Senator Tina Polsky. According to the Florida Phoenix, the bill that they're discussing would radically change the process of collecting petitions for citizen-led constitutional amendments. That bill was approved yesterday on a 6-3 party line vote in that Senate Ethics and Elections Committee. And it still has a little bit of ways to go, of course, but we'll continue to follow it. This has been WMNF's Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and if you missed any of today's show, or if you'd like to share it with a friend, you can watch it on WMNF.org beginning in about half an hour or an hour or so. And I want to thank so much my earlier guest, Jack E. Davis, a Pulitzer Prize winner and the author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. Thanks for that. You can watch that interview later on WMNF.org. In this time slot tomorrow at 10 on Wednesday is Midpoint, and then at 11 on tomorrow is is Talking Animals. Coming up next is an episode of Alternative Radio. We're going to hear Chris Hedges and Kshama Sawant, and their talk is called Workers Fight Back. Then coming up at noon is Wide Awake America with Nadine Smith. Today she speaks with survivalist Wyona Table about how ancestral skills offer more than survival. They ground us amid today's political turbulence. Well, this has been Tuesday Cafe, coming to you live on March 11th, 2025, from the studios of WMNF Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, and Lakeland. And finally, I want to wish Rob Lori a speedy and full recovery. He announced on his television program on Friday that he had a cancer diagnosis. So speedy recovery to you, Rob.